Hi, welcome everybody. So my name is Dina Levitz. I write, I practice and teach yoga, and I'm also part of the team that is working on SOULFest. And we're so excited that it's going to be in person again this year. And in the lead up, I'm talking to some of the amazing presenters that will be in attendance. And I feel like I'm in the presence of kind of yoga legend here today. I'm excited. We're both very old school with our headphones, as we were saying. So for more than 20 years, Dianne Bondy has been leading a yoga revolution, empowering students to come to the mat as they are, educating teachers on the need for inclusivity in yoga, and leading systematic change within the yoga industrial complex. Welcome, Dianne Bondy.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you for having me on the podcast, Dana. It's great to meet you.
You as well. Very, very excited. So thank you again for joining. So let's see. So I want to start off kind of from the beginning. I've been asking the presenters sort of how you got your start in yoga. Is there maybe kind of a first memory or motivation or something that made you kind of take up the practice?
This is my first start in yoga. It's this really old book called Be Young with Yoga that was written by Richard Hittleman. I think this book was written in, I want to say 1956, when this was published. Pardon me, 1962. So my mom in the 60s was kind of like, wanted to be a hippie, but was older, was the generation before that. And she comes from a small island nation called Barbados. And she emigrated to England and found this book at a tag sale in England in the mid 60s. Somebody was selling this at a garage sale or a tag sale or a flea market. And she bought the book and started like practicing from the book a little bit. And when I was a little girl, my parents had emigrated to Canada in the late 60s. And when I was a little girl, my mother was practicing, and she was practicing because she had 3 children in quick succession. So she had 3 children under the age of 4. My brother and sister are twins, and then there was me. And I was a precocious child with the gift of the gab, something that has not changed. This is my personality from day one. And so when she would put my brother and sister down for their mid-afternoon nap, she would go down to the basement and practice yoga. And of course, I'm this precocious 3-year-old, and I want to practice with my mom. And so the two of us would go through the book and pick out poses that we wanted to do in this really old book.
I love it. I see the picture.
Yeah. Right? Because look at the pictures, right? And even look at the print. It's like a typewriter, like literally, right? Is the print. And so my mom was always doing this pose. Like I always wanted to do, halasana with my mother. And so she was always doing yoga in the basement. And I just kind of tagged along because it was like a fun thing that we wanted to do together. And so, so that's how I kind of got started. So I got started in 1973. I've been practicing on and off since 1973 when I was 3 years old. So if you do the math, that makes me 52 in 2022. So that's been a part of my life, more or less for most of my life. I've kind of, drifted in and drifted out of yoga when I was in college. There's all these other things going around. And so you were trying other movement modalities for your body. But I have to say, yoga is the one thing that I've never fallen out of love with. And it's something that I practiced always both on and off the mat, sometimes more off the mat, and then sometimes more on the mat, depending on where I was in my life and what was going on and what I needed from the practice.
I love that. Yeah. And I'm sure, your practice ebbs and flows over the years and in different ways. And I love the idea of, on the mat, off the mat, obviously. So fast forwarding to that, as you said, you've been, you're decades and decades in at this point. What is it about the practice that's made it so that you have not fallen out of love with it? What is it that still kind of lights you up and makes you passionate about yoga?
It makes me think, and it gives me a direct connection to my empathy and my humanity. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. This past weekend, I taught a workshop at Kripalu, and we were talking about yoga and body image. And one of the things that I connect yoga and body image with is not only how we feel in our bodies or how we feel our bodies should perform, but the way we actually treat our bodies, and in the bigger scope of the world and society and community, how our bodies are seen in the world, like what bodies get access to justice, what bodies get access to healthcare, what bodies feel safe in all situations, and what bodies don't feel very safe. And so I was having a conversation around that, and somebody called me out on my perspective. And I was just like, wow. And I got, it was a really great teachable moment, because the two of us were kind of like head to head in this conversation. And then we broke for lunch, and I went and sat for contemplation because I had 2 hours for lunch. And I was like, okay, so why do I feel some kind of way when somebody was sharing their lived experience that I can't identify with? And I spend a lot of time talking to people about that. There's like a lot of self-reflection that happens in yoga. And in situations like that, I can process things pretty fast, and I will probably continue to process this whole experience. But I was just like, taken aback by this person's lived experience and how it didn't line up with my own belief systems or how I show up in the world. And I had to catch myself in the moment, because this is stuff that I'm always telling other people to do. So I had a moment right away to like practice what I constantly preach. And so for 2 hours, I took a little downtime. I worked it out in my head. And then I went back and I apologized to this person. I thought, who am I to question your lived experience? Because my lived experience gets questioned all the time. And I know how shitty, for lack of a better term, that feels when somebody tells you what their experience is and you don't believe them. And so I apologized. We had a conversation, and then I modeled that behavior for the group of how it is when we hear something that doesn't align with our belief system, or we're in confusion, or we're in disbelief of another person's experience, that it's not for us to judge that experience. And that's something I learned from my yoga practice. And that's something I take with me, that constant self-reflection. At times it's exhausting. I'm not going to lie. At times that constant self-reflection is exhausting, but it's good for personal growth. And I developed a friendship with this person based on this friction that we initially had. But which is what I love, like the two of us were like exchanging text messages and talking about phone numbers and figuring out how we can work together. And it could have gone totally another way. Or they could have gotten really upset with me and left the workshop and taken rest and relaxation or rest and restoration at Kripalu, but it was sticky. And it reminded me what one of the lessons my mother has taught me in my life, especially around the yoga practice, where there's friction, there's traction. So it's really good to work through those feelings. And what was really incredible is at the end of the workshop, when we were like witnessing, what we had learned over the course of the weekend, or what we took out of over the course of the weekend, people were thanking me for modeling that this is how productive self-reflection shows up in spaces where our lived experience is different and we can't quite wrap our head around it. And we have to remind ourselves, we don't sit in judgment of other folks. We just don't.
Wow, that is powerful. That's such a great example. And I even wrote that down, where there's friction, there's traction, because you're right. Self-reflection is not easy, which is
not for the faint of heart. Let me tell you, it's really, I think it's probably the hardest part of the practice for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the next thing I was going to ask you about, and this kind of segues in, is who's inspiring you right now? You're someone who, you teach, you do so many different things. So I know you undoubtedly inspire a lot of people, but what inspires you, especially at this moment?
You know what? I take my inspiration, I think, from the everyday. So it can be something, any interaction that I have with anybody. So I was inspired by the knowledge in the room in my workshop, and people sharing it was yoga, body image, and activism. And I was giving people tips on how to get out in the world and do something, because we're at critical mass. And we say that every election, but now more than ever, we're seeing some very scary things go on in the world. So, the time for sitting and reflecting on these things has been like long past. So now it's time for some action. Yes. So I was inspired by people like writing out their actionable steps of ways they were going to engage in either politics or community or local government to have their voices be heard. So I was really inspired that people got a fire in their belly. And the folks that I'm always most inspired by on like a public stage, or is anybody like my girl Lizzo. Like I love pop culture, and I love anybody in pop culture who is just unashamed to be exactly who they are, and take opportunities to speak up, speak out, or engage. Anybody who's in that space. I love politics. I have a degree in political science, and I love people like, AOC. I love anybody. I love people like Bernie Sanders. I love anybody I'm in Canada. So in the political landscape, I really love Jagmeet Singh, who's the leader of the New Democratic Party, who's talking about health and happiness for all of us, and really having intentional action plans for how that can happen. So people who are traditionally or historically ignored are pulled to the center, are up front in the fight. And those kinds of things inspire me. When people care about other people, that inspires me.
Absolutely. And it's so necessary. I mean, right now, always, but certainly right now. Yeah. I guess, in these times right now, I'm curious if there's a ritual, or maybe a few different rituals that you have for yourself, that something, whether it's in the morning or before you go to sleep, that it's like a must do. I have to do this to feel like whole and kind of complete and yourself.
I have an intentional well-being practice. If I don't know if you're showing the video, but if you can see my yoga mats behind me, and if I tip my desk is a bit of a mess. So if I tip my desk over, you can probably see Spinderella.
Yes.
My spin bike, which is one of the best investments I made during COVID when we were in lockdown. Any kind of physical movement feeds my soul and makes me feel alive. So sometimes it's riding my bike. A lot of times it's rolling out my yoga mat. Sometimes it's going for a walk or a run, depending on where I am. Sometimes it's lifting weights, but it's anything that engages me and gets me, because I say I spend a lot of time in self-reflection. So I spend a lot of time in my head. Yeah. So anything that gets me out of my head and into my body and gives me a shift from my perspective around my body, in a place of appreciation. Like I appreciate how strong my body is, how many things I can do. And that to me is my spiritual well-being practice. Is just any kind of movement. And it's something I do for myself, and it's something I do by myself. And it's separate from, especially if you're a yoga teacher, sometimes if you practice yoga and you teach yoga, some of us think teaching and practicing is a lot of the same thing, but it's not, right? Yeah. Teaching, you might get something back from your participants that helps you grow spiritually, because you learn something about yourself when you're teaching and you're in relationship with these folks. But something that is just for me, that takes care of just me, then I'm not really responsible for anybody else in that moment, really is powerful as a well-being self-practice for myself.
Yeah, that's great. That power of kind of joyful movement. Yeah. I started doing kind of like little dance breaks. So I get that. It resonates with me. Just moving, just to be happy, just to feel free. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Dance breaks are the best. Yeah. So the last day at Kripalu, instead of doing Shavasana, we broke out to Donna Summers' Let's Dance, because it's my feeling that Donna Summers is underrated. Yeah. She was the Beyonce of her time. Like she just came up with a lot of other folks. And I think that she got left behind a little bit. So anytime I can pay homage to Donna Summer, I feel like I should.
I love it. I love it. Yes, yes. Well, I'm going to bump up this. On that note, Diane, I'm going to bump up. I've been asking people towards the end of these interviews, but I'm going to ask it now since we're talking about music. If you had the power to kind of conjure up anytime you entered a room that you had sort of like your walk-up music, your theme music that would get going for you. Almost, I know you're.
It's about damn time. In a minute, Anita. That's my song. That's currently my song now. Or Big Energy by Lizzo. Those are not by Lizzo, by Lotto. Yes. And they have a remix where Mariah Carey and a remix with DJ Khaled now yesterday. Yes. And so I've been playing that pretty loud in my car. So Big Energy. Yes. Or It's About Damn Time. Those are the two things. Like I'm like in a minute, right? Like I'm just right in it.
Yeah, I had a feeling somehow Lizzo was going to figure in there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Or big time.
Absolutely.
Big time.
She's
big
perfect
time.
For that. Yes.
Big
yes.
Time. Yeah.
Okay. So Diane, for anyone who has not been lucky enough to be involved in a class or training with you or take an instruction for you or seen a YouTube video, what are they in store for? If they're thinking like they're going to come to SOULFest, maybe enjoying your session, what's a Dianne Bondy class like?
I'm loving this. Joyful, mindful, intentional movement class with an appreciation for our bodies. So instead of being, critical of what our bodies can and can't do, we're just going to celebrate what we can do. We're going to move. We're going to have some cool music. We're going to have some cool reflections. That's kind of how I roll. If things aren't joyful for me, because there's a lot of stuff that don't bring me joy, but one of the things about intentional mindful movement is the joy of it all. So it's going to be a joyful, fun practice with a little bit of something for everyone. So it matters not your ability level, what you can or can't do. Everybody's welcome. So I call it rated E for everyone. So I might have taken that from somewhere else.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So a party with like a little bit of depth too. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Joy is part of learning. So
absolutely. So you showed we saw Spinderella a minute ago before with your bike, but I was going to ask you about, particularly during this, it's obviously been a challenging couple of years with this pandemic. I know challenging doesn't even do it justice, but I'm wondering, you mentioned the bike, but if there's other hobbies or fun pursuits or things that you've gotten into, people have done the baking bread, all of those kinds of things. But what's a new thing that you've taken up that's
I'm slightly embarrassed, but what I have taken up is I've become obsessed with skincare and reviewing sunscreen of all things. Okay. So that's another, so I'm just trying out new things for skincare. Yeah. Anything that has like that, anything that's just new for me, but I've really enjoyed that. And to be quite honest, I've gotten into a little bit of gardening, and I think that's a sure sign that I'm getting older, because my parents were into gardening, and I used to say to my parents, I'll do that when I get older. I have too many things to do now. And now I'm putting my hands in the dirt and really enjoying it. So I've been cultivating some lilies. I've been growing strawberries, squash, zucchini, and hot peppers. So I've just been like trying out my green thumb. My mom has a perpetual green thumb, so I'm really trying to channel that, see if that's in my DNA as well.
Yeah, love it. And then kind of more broadly during this period, we've all learned different things about ourselves, sillier, deeper, just all kinds of different things. What have you learned about yourself in particular kind of during this period?
That I like to be alone a lot more than I thought, because I'm an extrovert. I like people. I have the gift of the gab. I don't mind being the center of attention. I've been doing public speaking since I was 12. Yeah. But what I really didn't realize is when everything kind of shut down and we were sheltered in place, how much I enjoyed just being still and quiet and alone. And so I don't have a very big house, but our house was well appointed enough that everybody kind of had their own space for hiding. Like my boys had their their own separate rooms. I have an office, which if you're looking at the video, I'm in my office. About half of it's like my yoga studio. The other half of it is like my workspace. And when I just didn't want to engage with the world, I would come and lay on my yoga mat or put my legs up the wall or close the door and get a little bit of downtime. So I spent a lot more time in introspection and a lot more time in my head, and a time to just really slow down and take a deep pause. Because prior to the pandemic, I was traveling a ton. I was probably traveling 32 to 33 weeks out of the year.
Wow.
So to go from that to basically nothing was really actually nice. I didn't realize how exhausted I was. I was probably operating mostly on adrenaline. So it was kind of nice to reset my body and just get back to, me and spending time with my family. And I was really surprised at how well we all got along while we were sheltered in place. Like, it was shocking. So that made me feel good. We really got to do some family things. Like, we had family game night and family movie night and family takeout night, because we were just hanging out with each other the whole time, right? There was nobody else. We had our little pod, and once we could start testing ourselves on the regular, then we could invite more of my family into the pod. So I did spend some more time with my siblings and my mom. So it was really getting back to myself, like being about my family as opposed to being super accessible for everyone else.
Yeah, that resonates a lot. I've heard that from a lot of people about kind of this taking a pause that they didn't even know that they really needed, but did a whole heap of good that, long overdue.
Wonderful. Yeah. Wonderful. I kind of liked the pandemic, that part of the pandemic, where I got to just slow down and not have to constantly be on, if you will, like constantly be on and constantly be rushing places. I got to slow down.
Certainly. This next question is kind of tailor-made for you. I've been asking most people, but because you literally wrote Yoga for Everybody, so you wrote the book on this. But for folks that, for whatever reason, don't feel like yoga is for them, or they've maybe been reluctant to try, what's usually your response to them? What's kind of your line to them?
Don't let what you see fool you, right? Because we see a lot of super performative stuff. It's like, it's changed a lot in the past, I would say decade, more specifically in the past 5 years, where we've seen more accessible practices. We've seen a lot more body diversity in terms of who's doing yoga. So I think that the one that comes up for most of us who are in the teaching space is, you don't have to be flexible to do yoga. You don't have to have a certain size of body or kind of body to do yoga, that this space is really for you. And to focus or find a teacher that understands how to adapt asana, because as much as yoga really is for everyone, asana, or the postures themselves, can be very exclusive, right? As to who has access to do certain things in bodies, whether it's physical ability or genetics or body proportion or access to spaces or access to teachers. All of those things, impede our ability to do a physical asana practice. But know that yoga is so much more than that. And it can be as slow as you want it to be. It can be as fast as you want it to be. It can be as meditative as you want it to be. So try not to look at the super athletic performative stuff and think that that's what's expected of you, because that's just marketing. And that's what I call the gawk factor. It's just to catch your attention. It's not actually what we're doing in most classes. That's usually somebody's personal practice. I've yet to go to a yoga class where that stuff is actually happening. And if I'm in a class, not to say I've never been in a class when that stuff's actually happening, I just stick to my own mat and do what I can do. And be happy for the people who are going to take their head, their leg behind their head. That's great. That's just not my ministry, right? That's just not for me. And I'm totally okay with that.
Very well said. Very well said. The last thing I was going to ask you, and this is also one that's kind of like just for you, on your Instagram, you had a series that I really liked watching, where I think you called it Wednesdays with My White Husband, or you would change days too, where it was like talking about racism.
Like Saturday edition of Wednesday with My White Husband.
Exactly.
We gotta get back to do that. We've got to get back to that. That was a really popular series. And I kept saying to Alan, I had him on my podcast because I'm like, people are asking about you, Mr. Bondy. I really liked giving people a peek into my relationship with my husband. And, I always tell folks that my husband is white, and having been married for almost 22 years, there's been a lot of learning on his part.
Sure.
And it's been challenging for some things. And there was lots of conversations we had when we were talking about having children. We have 2 boys. But it's been interesting, and it's nice to see like the Black perspective of something, and then maybe the not Black perspective of something, or his experience in the world versus my experience in the world. So that's what we talk about on the podcast, or on the IG stories, or our IG live. So we talk about those things, and we'll have to get back to it. People always ask us about that, which I think is really funny.
It's interesting. What was the next, like, what was the generation of that? How did it start a particular way? One day you just did it, or?
Yeah, it was just weird. Like one day I was doing a live, and I think he was behind me doing something else, and he asked me a question, and I go, I'm kind of on a live talk. Do you want to come in on this talk? And he's like, sure. And so we just opened it up, because on, like, if you watch any YouTube, sometimes like YouTube creators will do a husband tag, or a partner tag, or a child tag, where you get to meet people in their families. So, I thought to myself, like, open the door to take a peek into my life, and offer some insights into how we as a mixed race couple navigate the world, right? And what that looks like, and some of his experiences that he would have never thought about as a white person, and some of my experiences being married to a white person within my own culture and within his culture. And so it was completely accidental. I think he just happened in on a talk. I think I was just like, ask me anything, one of those ask me anything on IG live, and I'm like, oh, Alan's here, ask him anything. And then it turned into this whole, let's talk about current topics on things.
Yeah. Well, it's, as you said, it's kind of a peek into, your home life. And it's refreshing always just to kind of see people be honest, especially on topics like race at this time. So yeah. And
I think it's really interesting, to learn what you don't know, or how you form opinions, or what your biases are. So it's just, I personally thought it was fascinating. I'm glad people were interested in it. I just, I was, but don't tell them. Sometimes I like to listen to him talk. It's not a lot, but sometimes.
That's sweet. It would be bad if it was the opposite. So that's very sweet.
True.
Yes. Well, Dianne, Bondy, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you about such a wide range of different things. So thank you so much. And we'll be really excited to see you in New York for SOULFest.
I'm so excited. New York is one of my favorite cities, so I'm excited to come down and hang out with everybody. And I miss being in community live and in person. So there's a beautiful energy that happens with that. So thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for inviting me to this particular chat. I'm excited. Everybody come to SOULFest. It's going to be a riot. Well, not a bad riot, like a good riot.
In a good way.
But I mean, it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. Better choice of words. It's going to be a good time.
Absolutely.